Welcome back. Today we are stitching this teal satin stitch flower for our Whimsical Flowers Stitch Along. And we're going to start with the lighter color of teal. It is 959. I have 3 strands on my needle. And I'm going to pull in my finished one just so we can talk about how this is set up. So our stitches for this petal angle in here toward the stem. Our stitches for this petal angle in towards the stem, and the top also angles in. So the 3 petals have different angles for their satin stitch. And the best way I have discovered, or the best way I like to do this, is to just start in the middle and take that first stitch down to exactly where I want my stitches to angle. We're going to add a couple of green stitches here at the bottom. So we aren't going quite to the stem, we're just going to the bottom of the petal shape. So I'll make this first satin stitch, and then I'm just going to come up on the side. And again, I'm being very careful to come up directly on the line. The more you can exact you can be with your satin stitch needle points, the better. Satin stitch is made just by stacking a bunch of stitches right next to each other, and the more exact your needle points are, the smoother the finished edges of your shape will be. So I'm just taking extra care with each stitch to make sure I am, see this last one? I don't know if you can see it on screen. It's like a needle's width above these stitches. It's just a teeny bit off, not a whole bunch. So I'm going to unpick that stitch because I want this to look as awesome as possible. And we're going to try again. Coming down on my line, not above my line. That's better. And so I'm just going to keep my stitches parallel, so I'm not overlapping any stitches. If you remember from our orange satin stitch flower, those stitches were overlapping. These stitches are not. These stitches are just parallel, straight satin stitches. And I'm going to keep filling in all the way to this side of the shape, and then I will come back and fill in this side. There is our first petal done. Now I'm going to do the same thing with this second petal over here, but I'm going to, there's no but, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. So these stitches angle in towards the stem, but they're also angling in towards this other petal that is stitched. So you want to make sure when you're doing satin stitch that you come up into empty fabric over here, and then I'm going down by other stitches. This helps keep your needle from catching the other stitches, and it also helps you be more exact with your needle points because you can see the line you're coming up on, and then you know down here where I'm going down, all that needs to happen is these stitches need to go kind of melt into that other shape. But all I got to do is make it to right next to where my stitches are and go down. So I'm going to keep filling in this shape, and it looks like I'll have to trade to a new strand of floss, and then we will do the last petal. All right, there's that last petal stitched, and you can see that right here the stitches get really small, and that's just fine. You're just going to keep filling in until you fill in the whole shape. And now these last stitches are going to feel almost vertical, but you don't want them to be the same angle as that your first petal. So I'm going to come up here kind of in the middle, and I might even test just to make sure that if I go here that it's a different angle than this first petal, because we want the stitches to look like they're going in towards the stem, but we also want to distinguish this petal from the other two, which means it needs to go, the stitches need to go at a different angle. So following the same method here, I'm going to start in the center, work towards the side, and then I will come back and stitch the other side. Here are all of our petals stitched with satin stitch, and then we're going to come back in with our darker teal and make some accents next. So I'm going to tie off and trade to my darker teal. All right, I have changed my darker teal 3848, and I'm going to show you the hoop again, our finished one, so we can talk about where we're going to be stitching. So we're going to stitch the back stitch lines first, and they kind of are the separators between our petals, and then we'll come back and stitch these other accents. So we're going to start up through the middle, and then I'll talk about some landmarks to look for as we're stitching next. I just gotta fix the focus real quick. Perfect, we're ready to go. All right, so I'm going to come up right here at the bottom of these two petals, the base of our petals, and I'm coming up right just at the bottom of this line. Then we're just going to backstitch along this seam right here between the two petals. So if you don't remember backstitch, we're going to start with just a straight stitch, and I'm using small stitches because this is a small flower and we need to make some tight curves. So straight stitch first, and then I'm going to do just about that same stitch length up the seam, pulling my thread all the way up, and then I'm going to go down into the end of the previous stitch, just right on it, so there's no gap between the stitches. And then I'm going to repeat the process, coming up in the seam, our same little stitch length away, and then down into that previous stitch to make backstitch. Now we're going to continue following this line off to the left, going around the left hand petal first, because it's our front petal, and so we want to have it stand out as the one that's stitched around first. And I'm going to keep going until I've made it around the bend at the left hand tip up here. Oh, the thread got caught again. No knots, please. There we go. Till I've made it around the tip up here. And then I'm going to hide the last stitch into the edge of the flower. And I'll show you that when I get there. Okay, I'm about to make my last stitch. This is about how far down we're looking to go. We've made it around the corner, and we're going to go down about a stitch. We don't want to go down the whole side of the flower, just down a little bit. Now, you can see here with my needle that when I point the needle up, these stitches are pulled out of the way. So this tells me that my needle is under these stitches a little bit, which is what I want. I want this last stitch to look like it's ending under or inside the flower instead of right next to it. So if you make sure your last needle point comes from under the flower, it will have the appearance of this stitch blending here into the edge of the flower. And when this line is erased at the end, when I've finished my hoop, it'll look even smoother. Now I'm going to repeat this process. I'm going to jump over here to this side, stitch over into the center, and then up over the top with backstitch, and then we'll check in for our next accent stitches. This is backstitch finished for this flower, and then we're going to add some vertical, or I guess I should say some lines that follow the angle of our satin stitch to add a little bit more texture to these petals. So if we bring our finished one back in here to show you, you can see here that these accent stitches for the top kind of come all the way down to our back stitch, and then the accent stitches for here kind of are the top half to top third of both of those petals. So we're going to make these like we've made all of our other accent stitches. So we're going to I'm going to start here on this left petal. I'm going to come up through the stitches, kind of halfway, maybe closer to a third there. And then I'm going to go down right into, so I'm following, sorry, my fingers are in the way, let's try that again. I'm following the angle of the stitches, so I don't want to come over here, and I don't want to go over here. I want to follow this thread up here, and that's where that stitch ends. And then I'm just going to go straight into, kind of under the back stitch right here. Keep catching a thread, there we go. Just straight into the back stitch right here. So this thread will kind of disappear into the top. And we're going to, again, alternate long and short, just so they aren't all the same length. So I'm going to add another stitch right here. Again, following the threads up. So I follow the same angle as my satin stitch right up into the back stitch. Now I'm going to keep adding these stitches, being sure to follow my satin stitch shiz for the direction. And then, and then we'll be done with this flower. So let's make some more accent stitches. Here are all of our accent stitches finished. So you'll see over here, following this angle, and then straight up and down here. And then some of these touch down here and some of them do not. It's all personal preference, so whatever feels best to you is what you should do. Now the very last thing we have to do to finish this flower is we've got 2 or 3 horizontal stitches right here that are actually the green color of our stem. And this green is 581. So I'm going to anchor off teal and come back with 581 and we'll finish off this flower. And we're back with 581. I'm just going to come up right here at the base of the flower. My needle is almost touching the flower here. And I'm going to make the largest horizontal stitch first, staying very close to the flower. And then I'm going to make my next stitch just a little bit shorter, more narrow, if you will. Again, my needle is right up against the previous stitch, just like it would be if we were making satin stitch. And I'm going to come over here again, just a little bit shorter. And then I'm going to check and see. For me, this feels like this touches my stem enough, so I'm going to stop with 2. But if you had a gap still to your stem, you could add a 3rd stitch so that your flower looks like it's connected. Once you are done adding those 2 little green stitches, you are done for today. And then tomorrow, we will be finishing our flowers. Happy stitching, friends.